Beneath a sky bruised purple and blood-red by the sinking sun, the town of Dry Creek lay half-forgotten, like a memory fading at the edges. Dust stirred in lazy spirals around empty barrels and broken wagon wheels, settling slowly onto the cracked boards of the shuttered storefronts. Time seemed to fold in on itself here, where the wind whispered stories of ghosts and gunfighters long gone. Above the silent streets, on a rickety wooden beam stretching from a weathered rooftop, Alma swung gently, a fragile silhouette against the dying light. Her wrists, bruised and raw, were bound by coarse rope that cut into her skin, yet her eyes, dark and unwavering, held a quiet fire, a defiance no noose could snuff out. The town watched with a brittle silence, judgment heavier than the summer heat pressing down on every soul. Whispers twisted through the saloon doors, slipping between the cracks in the church pews, spreading like wildfire yet never spoken aloud to her face. Alma, a daughter of the earth and river, had become a symbol of what Dry Creek feared most: difference, resistance, and the stories that refused to be buried. She hung there not by chance, but by the cruel hand of men too frightened to confront their own shadows. The wooden beam creaked softly under the slight sway of her weight, each movement a heartbeat echoing in the stillness. A figure appeared at the edge of the square, emerging from the haze of heat and dust like a monument carved from the land itself. Cash McAllister, known across the territories as the giant cowboy, stalked forward with boots that dug deep into the earth and a frame that seemed to drink in the fading light. At 30 years, his broad shoulders bore the quiet strength of someone who had carried too many burdens and learned to shoulder them with a stubborn grace. His eyes, sharp and stormy, locked onto Alma's suspended form with a mixture of rage and sorrow so profound it threatened to crack his stoic facade. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, the distant howl of a coyote threading through the stillness. "You're coming with me," Cash said, his voice low, roughened by years of hardship and whiskey, but steady enough to slice through the night's tension. The words were neither a command nor a plea, but a promise, raw and irrevocable. Alma's gaze met his, and for the first time since the rope had been tightened around her wrists, a flicker of hope stirred within her. Not the kind born of fairy tales or easy salvation, but the slow, steady flame of survival. And so, as twilight bled into night, Cash climbed onto the porch, his hands steady as they cut the rope that bound her, freeing her from the weight of the world hanging above the town. The roughness of the rope slipping away was like a prayer whispered through cracked lips, small, sacred, and fierce. Alma's body sagged, worn but unbroken, and Cash caught her with the gentlest strength a man of his size could muster. Their breaths mingled, shallow and ragged, as the desert wind carried the scent of sage and smoke, a reminder of the wild land that neither could truly tame. She did not speak, nor did she fight the rescue. Instead, her dark eyes held a storm of questions, about the man who dared to defy the town, about the uncertain road ahead, and about the strange and fragile thread now binding them. They rode into the night with no words, the steady beat of hooves hammering against the dry earth a rhythm that seemed to slow time itself. The cool air wrapped around them, carrying the faint perfume of mesquite and distant rain. Cash's silhouette was a fortress against the vast, indifferent sky, and Alma nestled close, the rough fabric of his coat a shield from more than just the chill. In the space between the silence, the unspoken unfolded, two wounded souls circling, reaching, beginning to trust. Her fingers, calloused from a life of hard labor, brushed against the coarse wool at his wrist, tentative but insistent, as if to anchor herself to something real. There was no grand confession, no sudden flood of feelings, only the quiet accumulation of moments that whispered of something deeper than survival. The ride was a slow unraveling of pain and resilience, shadows of past lives blending with the promise of this fragile night. Curiosity hung like the first stars emerging above the desert, silent watchers of a bond forged not in words, but in shared breath and steady hands. At last, they came to rest beside a cabin crouched low against the rugged hills, a small sanctuary built from weathered timber and the sweat of honest work. The fire inside crackled softly, casting flickering patterns on rough walls that had witnessed hardship and grace in equal measure. Amma, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, felt the warmth seep into her bones, not just from the flames, but from the steady presence of the man who had saved her. Cash said nothing of promises or futures. His care was shown in the simple acts: fetching water, stoking the fire, laying a blanket gently over her shoulders when the night grew cold. Their silence was a language all its own, thick with unsaid stories and guarded hope. Amma's eyes traced the lines of Cash's face, weathered yet kind, marked by shadows she couldn't name but could feel. He carried his own ghosts, losses that hollowed him out but left a stubborn ember of something like faith. In this small room, surrounded by the vast wildness, they began to stitch together a fragile trust from the fragments of their fractured pasts. But the world outside was never far. The whispers followed them even here: snide comments from neighbors, the sharp glance of those who saw Amma as a stain on their town, and Cash as a fool risking all for a woman they deemed unworthy. Their judgment was a slow poison, creeping in like the dry wind that stripped the land bare. Yet inside the cabin's fragile walls, Amma and Cash forged a quiet rebellion, one not of gunfire and lawlessness, but of endurance and grace. Amma's spirit, once shackled by fear and scorn, began to stir. In the solitude, she tended a small patch of earth outside, coaxing stubborn wildflowers from cracked soil. Each bloom was a small victory, a whispered defiance against the harsh world that sought to erase her. Cash watched from the doorway, his gaze softening with a tenderness that scared him as much as it comforted. The bond between them grew, a slow and steady pulse beneath the surface of their lives. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and the sky deepened to a velvety blue, Amma reached out, fingers trembling, to tuck a stray lock of hair behind Cash's ear. The gesture was small, almost hesitant, but it spoke volumes. He caught her hand gently, his rough palm folding over hers in a silent promise of protection and belonging. It was in these quiet exchanges that their love took root, not with grand declarations, but with the soft resilience of two souls learning to heal together. Then came the knock on the door. The shadow of the town crept in again, cold and unforgiving. A posse demanding Amma's return, a reminder that the past would not be left behind so easily. But this time something had shifted. Cash stood tall, not with guns drawn or fury blazing, but with a calm resolve that held the weight of mountains. Amma, once silent and bowed beneath judgment, stood beside him, her gaze steady and unyielding. Words were few, but their meaning thundered in the stillness. Cash's voice was low and steady as he told the men that she was no longer theirs to claim. Amma's quiet strength was a beacon, a new dawn rising in the face of long shadows. The threat dissipated, not through violence, but through the unbreakable bond they now shared, two souls united against the tide of cruelty and fear. In that moment, beneath a sky bleeding gold and promise, Cash offered Amma no grand vows, only a simple truth: to walk forward together, not as captor and captive, but as equals forged in fire and grace. Tears mingled with dirt and laughter as Amma accepted, her heart lightened by the weight of a past no longer binding her. As the first light of dawn spilled across the rugged horizon, their silhouettes merged, two figures riding side by side, their shadows long and unbroken. And though the road ahead was uncertain, it was theirs to travel, marked by the quiet courage of love born from hardship, resilience, and the gentle power of small acts of grace. And so, dear traveler of stories, when life seems too vast and the night too dark, remember Amma and Cash. Remember that sometimes salvation does not roar but whispers, that love grows in silence before it blooms, and that dignity is carved slowly from the earth beneath our feet. In every ending there is a beginning, and in every heart, the strength to rise again.